This episode's made possible by Planful.
Hi, this is Craig Conti, the CFO of Vera Mobility, and you're listening to the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 955.
While we've done a great job, I'd say, over the last 2 years, continuing to push and challenge and raise the bar for my team and making sure that we're doing things faster, automating as much as we possibly can so that we don't have to scale our costs as the business scales, and then continuing to connect the dots and create the narrative that we can use both internally to help the business understand what we've done and, more importantly, where we need to go, but also connecting those dots for the external community and make sure that investors understand both where we've come from and our financials, but also, more importantly, where we're headed and what do things like the product roadmap look like and how does that connect to the longer term financials.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Lauren StClair, CFO of NerdWallet. It was back in 2016 when Lauren StClair realized that it was time to raise her hand. Online marketplace giant eBay had just completed a deal to acquire the Spanish online ticket platform Ticketbis, and StClair, a 9-year eBay veteran, was itching to get overseas. For its part, eBay had entered the online ticket business in 2007 with its acquisition of StubHub, and the addition of Ticketbis now promised to fatten StubHub's international revenues, a development requiring eBay to beef up its leadership overseas, opening the door to StClair, who'd arrive in Bilbao, Spain in early 2017, eager to open a career chapter as CFO of StubHub International. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this.
Hi, I'm Rowan Tonkin, Chief Marketing Officer at Planful, and we're a proud sponsor of CFO Thought Leader. At Planful, we're empowering teams just like yours to drive peak financial performance in every corner of your business. What sets Planful apart? We have purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. This means we can get you up and running within weeks, and it requires minimal IT involvement. So you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business in your key financial processes. Best of all, you can't outgrow us. We take the pain of growing away with an unmatched ability to scale with you. You have an endless runway with Planful. See why over 1,300 customers around the world choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Go to planful.com and see how you can make financial performance a team sport in your business.
Hello, we're speaking with Lauren StClair, CFO of NerdWallet. Lauren, welcome.
Thanks, Jack, for having me.
So, Lauren, as always, I always begin here by asking our guests to look back, trying to identify those experiences they feel prepared them for a finance leadership role. What would come to mind for you?
The first thing I'd probably have to say is I've had a lot of remarkable leaders, both in finance and in other functions, that have actually helped guide me. They were wonderful mentors, and they're probably the ones who gave me all these experiences. So credit to them first and foremost. But 3 things probably come to mind that are particularly impactful. One is just the diverse set of functional and business experiences I had. Second one is international opportunities. And then the third piece is just being part of great teams. So I'll go into a little bit more detail. I was able to spend a very large part of my career at eBay in Silicon Valley and actually in other offices around the world. And I think that they had a best-in-class finance operation. And most importantly for me, they had a great employee development program. And it was because of that I had the opportunity to not only learn about, but actually spend time in a number of different finance roles across different business units. So I spent time at PayPal, at eBay, in different regional offices, at the corporate office. I spent time at StubHub. I had the opportunity to get hands-on experiences across the traditional finance, planning and analysis, some exposure to controllership, corporate development, as well as investor relations. And I think that helped me connect the dots, which enabled me to tell better stories and with the narrative around combining the business with the financials. But I also think it really helped me to understand my strengths and areas of development and what things I was most passionate about. The second area, I've been incredibly lucky to have lived abroad in a number of different countries over the years. I've lived in Germany, I've lived in East Africa, in Singapore, and most recently in Spain. And that's had a pretty dramatic impact on my view of the world, which translates into professional life as well. And for me, these experiences underscored the importance of empathy and willingness to adapt. It's allowed me, I think, as a CFO now to remain flexible during constant change, as we're all aware of right now, and to be able to better forecast and quickly adjust to ever-evolving financial conditions and macroeconomic conditions. And really in any role, I think it's important to be able to see a situation from multiple perspectives and to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. The third piece was, while not exactly part of my professional career per se, I spent a ton of time on a variety of teams. I had the opportunity to play basketball from a very early age up and through the collegiate level. And for me, that's taught me how the mix of people can make or break the chemistry and success of a team, how being really clear on roles and responsibilities is important for the overall health of the team. And for me, the other interesting piece I didn't really figure out until a little bit later was the value of feedback. When you're being coached every day, you just get used to receiving feedback, and you also have to give feedback to teammates and coaches. And I think for me, being able to both give and receive that feedback in a professional setting has helped me also progress throughout my career.
So thank you. Nice overview for us. Lots of takeaways. Appreciate it. It was about combined, PayPal, eBay, StubHub, all part of the eBay family, I suppose. 9 years, 10 years, somewhere about that. Is that
13 and a half years.
Okay. I know that along the way, you did go back and get an MBA, or was that an executive program? Is that an MBA?
It was an MBA.
Why was the time right? What were you thinking?
I did get my MBA. It was a format that was an executive style format. So we were required to both go to school full time as well as work full time. And for me, it was important to supplement my hands-on experience. I had just transitioned out of sort of the tech and engineering part of my career into the finance part. And it was important for me to supplement with classes and a network of folks that I could rely on to help me answer questions and things like that. I also chose to do an executive style program because I didn't want to lose those 2 years of experiences. Yeah. And I thought that it would help me both contribute better in class and also really understand and pull some of the more theoretical part of the learning into day-to-day operations.
Were there other eBay classmates, or how did it work exactly?
So there weren't at the time any other eBay classmates sort of in my program. As you can tell, I love learning and traveling abroad. And so my area of focus was also on international business. And so I found a particularly unique program that was out of Duke and the Fuqua School of Business. It's called the Cross-Continent Program. So we actually, for each one of sort of our semesters, but they were really 6 to 8 week periods of study, we traveled to a new city around the world. So we went with all of the faculty, staff, and my classmates. We traveled for anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks to a new city around the world, took classes in person, and then supplemented in the off weeks with remote learning.
It's interesting. You went abroad, and you mentioned Germany and Spain to us. and it was clearly a priority for you. And I think it was more than just advancing your career or gaining business knowledge. I think it was, part of your mindset. I want to, explore the world. I think there's a counter argument. Sometimes you're removed from the action. Sometimes you're taking yourself out of the opportunities that might have been stateside or wherever. How am I doing? What would you share with us? How would you react to that?
I would say spot on with a lot of things. I love learning about new cultures, especially through food and through wine, but also seeing new places and how different, I would say how different parts of the world prioritize different parts of their life. So for me, that was always the allure. I got to travel pretty early on, especially for basketball. I had the opportunity to study abroad, and that sort of carried into my professional career as well. But your point about, hey, being away and being out of maybe sort of like the corporate spotlight has pros and cons. And it's very interesting because one of my mentors early on in my career, he knew that I wanted to live abroad. And he said, listen, build your reputation, build your network and the connection at the corporate office, and then go off and then go try working in one of the regional offices, because that way you've built your network, you've built your connections here, you're top of mind here. And then when you go, you can always come back. And so I think that was also really good career advice.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. It seems like very quickly you found your lane into FP&A. Is that right? Or was it ever challenging? I mean, did you get assigned certain areas of the business that you weren't interested in? Or what would you share with us? And again, it's a while ago now. You can be brutally honest. There must have been certain projects you weren't up for.
Yeah, I think FP&A was probably the easiest way for me to get into finance. I actually come with more of an engineering type background, and I was a product manager for the first few years of my career. So that was probably the easiest function within finance to move into. What I also love about FP&A is that you can be at the 30,000 foot view level at corporate, or you can be in the weeds and in the trenches with the business in the next day. And I think that's what I actually really appreciate about FP&A is just the breadth of experience and also the depth that you can go depending on the job and the business needs.
Can I ask again, with that span of time that you were with eBay, can you give us a sense of how that company grew over that time? And there were bumps in the road along that time as well, I believe, for eBay as well. So you went through some transformational period, including the leadership, I think. So what would you share with us how the company is so different from the one you joined?
Very, looks very different. That was actually part of the reason I was there for 13 and a half years. So I joined early on at PayPal. PayPal was still in hyper growth at that time. I think they were also getting to the point where they were getting out of sort of those awkward teenage years and becoming a little bit more sort of on their own and stand up on your own company. eBay went through many different transitions while I was there, both some what you would call turnarounds, some slower growth. I'll also comment probably later on in the podcast about some areas of hyper growth and how we managed through that and unexpected and uncertain situations. And then also at StubHub, I'd seen sort of all of the ebbs and flows and saw rapid growth and saw when things were a little bit tougher, some of the macro world. So a lot of different experiences at different parts of the life cycle.
And that, forgive me, it was a acquisition StubHub, is that right? And were you, can you share with us, what was your, you become CFO of StubHub International eventually. And I'm just curious, were you aware of when they were acquiring it, or was it something that an opportunity that came your way after it was acquired or what have you?
Yeah, a little bit of both. This goes back to I raised my hand and said I wanted to live abroad, and everyone said, we understand that. For right now, stay at the headquarters in the corporate office. And so I had a heads up that the acquisition was coming. And just for a quick background, StubHub obviously had an incredibly large presence in the US and wanted to expand that presence internationally. And through organic investments, realized that it would be a little bit faster by acquisition. And so they went through the acquisition. People knew that I wanted to live overseas, and it was a good time for me to depart the group that I was in And so, yeah, I raised my hand and they sent me over there. So it was one, to be the CFO of the international division, but also to help with integration.
We're curious about your decision making in terms of when you finally do leave eBay. And again, your growth and your career blossomed there. But when you do leave eBay, what is the company you're looking for? What, did you have an idea, not NerdWallet specific, but certain qualities that the company you had in mind to join?
I did, and it was a very difficult decision to decide to leave eBay. I loved the role that I had at the time. I loved the finance, people around me, and I loved the business I was supporting and the business leader. But I knew at some point it was going to be time to move on. But I said, listen, I'm curious and I'm very interested in a particular type of role. I'll give myself an opportunity to really search for and find that right company. I don't need to leave right now. So I gave myself many months and I interviewed with many different companies. For me, I had a couple set of criteria that was incredibly important. Based on the experiences I had at eBay, I wanted to go take that number one finance role at a smaller company. I wanted to go to a private company that had the opportunity to do a pretty large exit event or a liquidity event. And so that is where I spent a lot of time interviewing and meeting with leadership. As I've talked about, teams are incredibly important for me. And so it was also important for me to find a leader that I both respected, but could complement and work with, as well as the leadership team that person created. And so after many different interviews, I met with Tim Chen, our co-founder and CEO at NerdWallet, and resonated with him, had an opportunity to meet with the rest of the leadership team, and really appreciated the mission and vision of the company, as well as being the finance person, appreciated the financials. And I thought they were in one of the best positions I had seen to go through some sort of liquidity event.
Well, I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with NerdWallet. At the same time, permit me to ask my question. Mm-hmm. Tell us about this company. What's it about today? What's NerdWallet up to?
NerdWallet is a platform that provides financial guidance to consumers and small and medium-sized businesses, or SMBs. And our mission is to provide clarity for all of life's financial decisions. And we achieve that by providing consumers and SMBs with trustworthy, comprehensive, and knowledgeable financial information so they can make smart money moves.
Can you give us a little bit of the history of NerdWallet then, in terms of its capital structure and like a sense of its size today?
So Tim founded NerdWallet because his sister asked him to help her find a credit card. She had just moved, I believe, to Australia, and she was looking for the best card for probably foreign exchange and being an expat in a new country. And so Tim said, hey, I'll just Google that for you. It won't be a big deal. Well, turns out that Googling such information isn't so easy. A lot of the time it's because you're looking at, I would say, sources that may not be the most reliable, or there's incentives for folks to push a certain product over another one. And he realized there was a gap in the market. And so he created a spreadsheet with all of these different credit cards, and the spreadsheet got forwarded around, and he realized there could be a business proposition in all of this. And so that's how NerdWallet was founded. And Tim, since the founding, has always run the company for the long term and has always made trade-offs and sacrifices in the short term to make sure that we had the best product for consumers and SMBs in the long term, and to not cut corners. And so he's done an excellent job to date in terms of making sure that we manage for profitability, making sure that we don't sacrifice the user experience at all. And so we're in a really great position today. We went public I guess now it's almost 2 years officially. Yes. And our trailing 12-month revenue is just over $600 million. So that hopefully gives you some sense of size and scale.
So yeah, you did join in December 2020. And as we all might remember, it's during COVID time still. No vaccine just yet at that place in time, but you will take the company public within 12 months. So I imagine you are climbing aboard a moving train, or what's the expression? But can you give us a sense of, as you join the company, your priorities? And obviously, I don't want this to be IPO readiness, but as you come aboard, just give us a sense of the atmosphere and how things were moving rather quickly, even despite COVID, one would imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of excitement, a lot of energy when I joined, and my priorities were really to get to speed, up to speed on the business, learned how we operated, what levers we had, how the macro impacted us.
In that January that you first joined, would you have been surprised to learn that you're going to be public before the year end, or was that really up on the board already?
That the discussions were happening during the interview, so I knew it was a possibility, but it was not decided definitively that we would go through with that. So I joined. I was there for about 2 months, made my assessment, made my recommendations, and Tim and the board and myself got together and we decided, given the environment, everything else going on, that we would start the process. And knowing that things could change at either moment, but we wanted to make sure we were ready to capitalize when the time was right.
So no roadshow. It was a little done a little differently than the sort of romanticized notion of the IPO path, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Would you agree, or what else might have been different?
But yes, we did not spend. I think I had maybe one meeting in person with the bankers in that, call it, 9-month stretch. Everything else was done remotely. I've heard stories of late nights in the office and food being delivered and lots of printouts and paper and things like that. So that was one interesting thing. Obviously, not having gone through it, I don't have any actual experience to look back on, but heard some of the stories from bankers and other folks and advisors. The second piece around the roadshow, you're exactly right. There's no, I would say, romantic version of the roadshow. But with that being said, it was very efficient. We got up super early in the morning to meet with East Coast investors, but we could get in front of a lot of different people because we were remote, because we leveraged Zoom. And so while there's pros and cons to both, it was certainly efficient and we were able to get it done.
I would suspect that the systems and, turning around the books and that type of IPO readiness, I think this company was already pretty mature in that respect. And it might have been the investor relations piece of it, which you were along the front lines with, that had to be pulled into place and made battle ready, I would suppose, for less of a better way of explaining it. But I mean, how am I doing?
Yes. So when I joined NerdWallet, I was very lucky. I walked into a very nice situation. I had a great controllership team and I had a really strong finance team already. They had already upgraded and updated our ERP system. They were closing the books faster and they were in a pretty good cadence and rhythm already, which was fantastic. There were some new functions, though, that knowing we were going to be a public company was important to staff up early. So things like some more technical accounting, SEC reporting roles. You named investor relations is a big one for me. I've had experience there, and it was important for me to bring that function in-house versus leveraging an outsourced provider in the short term. And then internal audit was something that I knew we would also need at some point in the not too distant future. And so we also staffed up that department as well.
I want to ask you about your visibility into this business. And again, I think it was maybe pretty sophisticated. You mentioned the controllership was really in place, and but your lines of sight into the numbers and how the company looked at its business now, beyond 2 years later. Are you looking at it any differently? Is there a particular metric that you have sought to raise the profile of these last 2 years, or as you've progressed into this a little deeper?
Mm-hmm. There's two metrics I'd call out as something that has started to sort of shift and evolve since I first joined. So monthly unique users is one of the main metrics. We report that every quarter. But as we talk about our journey and our strategic vision for the next, call it 5 years, we really want to be the trusted financial ecosystem that small businesses and consumers turn to learn, to shop, and to manage all of their personal finances. And so for us, we are on a journey to get folks registered, to have people connect more information so that we can provide more robust recommendations and more personalized recommendations at scale. So as a result of that, we are talking a little bit more about registered users. We talked about in Q3, we drove a 38% year-over-year increase in the cumulative number of registered users that we have. So that's one of the metrics that we started talking a little bit more about. The other one, which is a bit more financial related, but a lot of companies of our size and scale tend to use adjusted EBITDA as their main profitability metric. And we started disclosing our version of a non-GAAP operating income, which is very similar to adjusted EBITDA, except we take out stock-based compensation as well as internally developed software costs that were capitalized during the period. And that was important for Tim and I because we hold our managers internally accountable for the full cost of employee compensation, whether that's a cash or non-cash expense. And so we wanted our fellow shareholders to hold us accountable to that same standard. And so that was another new sort of metric, financial measure that we started disclosing recently.
I'd be curious to learn your idea about how the finance function may be evolving. And again, you've made some key hires, you've had to add to the team, but maybe there were different professionals who 10 years ago would have been the logical additions, but not longer. You'd rather invest here or you'd rather modify the team in some way. And I'm sure it has a lot to do with data insights and augmenting visibility into the business, perhaps. But can you reflect a little bit on how you're organizing finance and where you think the future is going to lead you in terms of what this organization is going to look like 5 years from now or should look like?
One of the groups that I also have the opportunity to manage is our analytics and business intelligence groups. And those groups can sit in a number of different places. At my time at eBay, I learned pros and cons of those being centralized or decentralized. And so it's important from my perspective to have teams that can be a checks and balance and have a little bit of air cover. And so that way, when they are helping to report out or analyze the business unit that they're supporting, there's no sort of conflict of interest, right? And so I like to provide that air cover. But I do think, to your point about sort of the future of finance and where things are heading, and there's so much information and there's so much data, and being able to better connect the business performance and business analytics with the outcomes on our financial statements, I think is the real power in having those teams combined. And so it's something that we've been talking a lot about internally and really strengthening I would say, the input of those two teams, having them collaborate more, and also providing our business leaders with a single point of contact so that they can understand business performance and then how that connects to the financials in a way that we haven't been able to do in the past.
Just to try to discover what's happening with your FP&A team, if you were walking down the corridor to a conference room and you swung open the door and there are some of your FP&A team members seated at the table, what are they thinking Lauren's about to ask them?
The biggest question I ask my FP&A leaders is, one, to think 3 steps ahead and to also be thought partners for the business. So while yes, I would think it's table stakes for our role to be able to consolidate financials and roll up reports, to me, that is not the value add that finance can bring to the table. So it's, hey, as a result of these numbers, here's a recommendation on what we can do to better optimize the business, or let's put more investment dollars here, or hey, we're not getting the results that we expected to out of this initiative. Maybe we pull back a little bit or reallocate resources to something else. And so for me, it's really being a thought partner and coming to the table with the business and having a perspective and a voice.
I want to just touch on AI quickly with you. And again, we know that over the last 12 months, there have probably been a lot of conversations around AI, but just to narrow our lens, maybe just on finance for the moment, how is AI likely to impact, what you do as a leader in this functional area? What would you tell us?
Yeah, so at NerdWallet, we think about AI in two main ways, and I'll spend all my time on the first, which is what you asked. So, how it can drive efficiencies across all areas of the business, and then also how it can enhance our consumer journeys and our consumer experiences. So, I do think AI has the ability to help all functions. For us in particular, in finance, we're using it in a couple different ways. So, one, my team leverages AI to help with coding, for instance, or using SQL or Python to query our data warehouse to be more sufficient so they don't have to rely on other teams to help them get the data that they want in the moment. So that's one great use case for us. The other thing right now is that we're leveraging new features and functionality that our third-party software vendors are implementing within their own tools and systems. And so we see early progress in things like accounts payable. We're also looking at RPA or robotic process automation and leveraging some of the AI capabilities that those vendors are also bringing to the table.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We're going to move to our finance strategic moment question, where we ask you to look back in time and just share one moment, a strategic insight that you've had along the way. What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
The story that comes to mind, and I referred to this a while ago, but back in 2020, when COVID hit, as you mentioned, I was the CFO of eBay North America. And we all know that e-commerce did quite well during the pandemic. And we were experiencing a period of incredibly high growth. At the same time, we were also all adjusting to a remote only working environment. And while the business was doing great, there was a lot of uncertainty. And some of the challenges beyond just how to forecast the business in times like that was how to manage investment opportunities that both captured short-term demand, but then also allowed us to continue to build for the future. And I think that experience of managing teams and the business through uncertainty is so valuable for me right now as NerdWallet is navigating lots of challenges, both as a new public company, but also during a period of macro uncertainty. And similar dynamics exist today, but maybe in a slightly different capacity than, say, in 2020. But how do you forecast a fintech company during this period of, listen, we've had a regional banking crisis, we've had geopolitical challenges, we have uncertainty about consumer health, and is there going to be a recession? And so we too are managing expectations for the short term while continuing to invest for the long term in a very pragmatic and disciplined way. And so having been through something similar has given me, I think, a bit more confidence to manage through the dynamics today and what's likely going to come for, in the short term and the long term.
Yep. From episode 853, this is 1 Minute with Chip Vint, CFO of Deluxe.
If all things are equal, just based off how the revenue's moving, we know what it's going to do to our profitability, our mix. And so keeping our eye on the ball on revenue and the pipeline behind it is oh so important. We also have to focus very hard on our expense growth factors. So think of that as your expense growth ratio to your revenue growth, right? And you can't have any one area where, if revenue is going to grow 3%, you can't have your expenses grow 6%. And so it's discipline inside the portfolio, and there's things that are declining, the expenses need to decline in line with it, and things that are growing, the expense growth has to be controlled and tethered and stay in sync. And so we're always focused on that expense growth factor. It's kind of an E/R ratio, but it's a different thought.
Well, thank you for that. We're going to move to our mentoring round, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We'd like you to think back, and we did touch on this, but I think it would be interesting. There must have been something when you first came aboard here that you wish someone had told you. And again, for all those newbie leaders, and of course you were stepping into an organization at a strange place and time, nonetheless, what do you wish someone had told you? There must have been something you could have been informed about.
I mentioned before, I'm very fortunate to have had a number of mentors and sponsors who shared a lot of their lessons learned. So I feel very fortunate from that perspective. But there's probably one thing that I didn't fully appreciate until now, and that is the value of prioritizing the most important things in your life, whether that be personal or professional. And then most importantly, spending your time accordingly. I've always been a very hard worker, thanks to my parents, and I took a ton of pride in doing things myself. And what I found over time, though, is it's really easy to continue to take on more and more and more responsibilities at home and at work, but it's really, really hard to do it all well, all at the same time. And I know that there's a lot of people, during a lot of different times where we might struggle about not excelling in every aspect of our lives at the same time. So now more than ever, I think it's really important that you get comfortable communicating and prioritizing what's important to you and the goals, whatever those might be. And then also being okay with saying no or not right now. That is not the highest priority. Here's what is, and here's the why behind it and the context, and being able to, again, say, we'll get to that, down the road. And so rather than taking on everything at one time and expecting myself to be perfect, it's important to prioritize and set work and personal boundaries. Because if we don't do it for ourselves, no one's going to do it for us.
Lauren, what's one thing that most people generally don't know about you?
A lot of people assume that I've always wanted to be a CFO, and that's actually not the case. So I'm a Philly girl, born and raised, and I moved out to California to the West Coast for undergrad, and I thought I wanted to be a doctor. But I went to undergrad in 1998, and I went to school in Silicon Valley, so this whole computer thing and everything that was going on, I saw a lot of my friends coming out of school in really cool positions at really cool companies. And so I decided to make the switch to a science and technology degree. And as now I've shared a little bit more over this podcast, I've held a lot of different positions, from engineering to product management and to all sorts of positions within finance. So I planned on being a doctor, but I'm really grateful for the experiences I had and where I'm at right now.
Would we be surprised to find you living in another part of the world at some time in the future, given your past?
I think that's a pretty safe bet. Mm-hmm.
That itch is not going to go away. We like to ask for a book selection, and it doesn't have to be a business book, but any book selection for us that you can share?
Something that's resonated with me quite a bit is the book Range by David Epstein. And I definitely think that probably applies to a lot of different aspiring leaders, not just within the finance world. But for me, it resonates with my own personal career journey, having had a number of roles across different functions and within finance. And for me, I was told very early on in my career that I would absolutely have to specialize in something in order to move up the corporate ladder, but I just was never able to do that. I wanted to understand different perspectives, different jobs. I saw cool opportunities, so I raised my hand. And lo and behold, I think I became a generalist and a jack of all trades, in some ways, master of none. And so for me in particular, that book resonated. And then especially in today's world where we have access to so much information and data, it is impossible for one person to know everything or be like a complete specialist. And so knowing how to connect the dots or recognize different patterns, just being resourceful, having the right mix of skills around you, and then sometimes just being okay with being uncomfortable while you get up to speed. So that's sort of what I took from my experiences, but also from the book.
So, Lauren, we're up to our last question, which is when we ask you to look forward again, finally. And we're wondering about the next 12 months as CFO of NerdWallet. What would your priorities be?
Single biggest one for me right now is ensuring flexibility for the business to continue to operate and invest for the long term, despite some of the macro volatility right now. while balancing our commitments to profitability and continuing to expand margins the way we have over the past few quarters. And so that's probably the biggest thing I can do is give the business some air cover and make sure that they can operate most effectively for them. And I would say at the same time is while we've done a great job, I'd say over the last 2 years, continuing to push and challenge and raise the bar for my team and making sure that we're doing things faster, automating as much as we possibly can so that we don't have to scale our costs as the business scales. And then continuing to, connect the dots and create the narrative that we can use both internally to help the business understand what we've done and more importantly, where we need to go, but also connecting those dots for the external community and make sure that investors understand both where we've come from and our financials, but also more importantly, where we're headed and what do things like the product roadmap look like and how does that connect to the longer term financials.
Lauren StClair, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack, for having me.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.